Most people don't notice silence, but Elliot Foster lived inside it, in a quiet mountain town in Colorado, where winter snow falls heavier than words of acceptance. Elliot's life had become a ritual of restraint. He rose before dawn, painted quietly in the dim light of his kitchen, then walked alone to the small middle school where he taught art. His voice only grew louder when helping students shade shadows on a canvas. But at home, his silence returned. It wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a dream buried deep. Years ago, Elliot had imagined a different life. He once loved someone, a man who made him believe they could build a home together. But that dream crumbled. Not with a fight, not with betrayal, just fear. His partner left, too afraid to live different in a town where even neighbors watched you breathe. Elliot didn't chase after him. He simply folded the memory and put it away, like an unfinished painting he could no longer touch. After that, Elliot never tried again. He stopped hoping for family, for partnership, for anything more than the rhythm of brushstrokes and lesson plans. People called him kind, dependable, harmless, but no one asked why his eyes always looked like they were waiting for something that never came. Then came the fire. It started deep in the woods that had surrounded the town, swallowing trees and silence alike. When it reached the outer roads, families fled. The local school gym became a shelter. Elliot, like many others, volunteered to help. He brought blankets, canned soup, quiet hands. That's where he saw them. 5 boys, huddled together on a single mattress near the back wall, none older than 15, each with eyes that had learned too soon not to expect kindness. They had no parents, no relatives coming. Each of them had been passed from one foster home to another. Some had been labeled too complicated. Others were too feminine, too quiet, too angry. But Elliot didn't see trouble. He saw fire survivors, not of forests, but of families that left before loving them. A caseworker whispered the details. These boys had something in common. They were all queer or suspected to be. In this town, that was enough for most families to turn away. One boy had worn nail polish to school and was expelled from his foster home that night. Another had spoken too gently. Another had simply refused to speak at all. Elliot didn't speak either. He simply brought them a blanket, then sat beside them on the floor. By the end of the week, the shelter emptied. But 5 boys had nowhere to go, and Elliot did something no one expected. He took them in. One by one, he signed the papers, listened to the questions, faced the stares, and brought them home. People talked. Some called him foolish. Others called him worse. Rumors circled like vultures, each one uglier than the last. But Elliot had heard worse and survived it. What he had never heard before was 5 boys laughing under his roof. The house was too small, the beds too close, the pantry never full. But for the first time in years, Elliot's home echoed with something louder than silence. It echoed with life. He named them Finn, the quiet one with sorrow behind his eyes; Luca, the dancer who spun joy from pain; Noel, whose love for drawing was his escape; Jude and Julian, the twin boys who held hands like a lifeline, having survived too many goodbyes already. No one understood this family, but they didn't need understanding. They just needed each other, and that was enough. If this story moved you, and you believe in love that doesn't follow rules but rewrites them, subscribe to Heart Story, because some families aren't made by blood. They're painted together by love. The town whispered. They whispered in grocery store aisles, at church parking lots, behind classroom doors. Elliot Foster, the quiet art teacher, had adopted 5 boys, and not just any boys. They said the boys were odd, troubled, too soft, too loud, too different. Whispers sharpened into questions. What kind of man raises boys like that? What kind of home lets them be who they are at school? Finn wore a purple sweater one morning. He had found it in a thrift shop and loved how it felt. Soft, safe. That same day, Banu, someone shoved him against a locker and called him names he wouldn't repeat. When the principal asked Elliot what he wanted to do, Elliot just looked at his son and said gently, What do you want to do?" Finn said nothing, but that night, he came home and drew himself wearing that sweater. Standing tall, Elliot framed it. Luca had always loved dancing, but more than that, he loved transformation, becoming someone else, someone brighter. He'd sneak into Elliot's old art cabinet and use face paint to become characters of his own making. One day, he wore eyeliner to a school event. The next day, the parents' committee filed a complaint. They accused Elliot of encouraging confusion. Noel was quieter, always reading, always sketching manga characters on old envelopes in the backs of homework sheets. One of his teachers marked his work inappropriate because one character had pink hair and kissed another boy. Elliot didn't argue. He just helped Noel create a space in the living room with shelves for every book he loved and paper for every story he wasn't afraid to tell. Jude and Julian, the twins, had become inseparable since birth, not just because they were twins, but because the world had tried too many times to split them up. 4 different foster homes, 4 different beds, but Elliot let them sleep side by side. He never forced them to dress alike, never asked them to act normal. He let them be who they were, one shy and methodical, the other impulsive and always first to laugh. They all shared one room. The house was too small for privacy, but big enough for trust. They passed clothes between them, made up bedtime stories, carved their names into the base of the kitchen table like a secret vow to each other. Their shoes stacked in the hallway like a scattered chorus. Outside their home, people stared. Some crossed the street when they saw Elliot with the boys. At the annual school fair, no one sat at their table. When Elliot volunteered to help paint sets for the winter play, one parent said, not quietly, maybe someone else should work with the kids. But Elliot stayed quiet. He didn't fight back with words. He fought back with dinners cooked from scratch, with patched up coats, with homemade birthday cards that said, "You are seen even when the world looked away." They didn't have much. The furnace broke down in winter. Groceries sometimes ran low. Elliot sold some of his own artwork to keep the lights on. The boys never asked for more. What they had was a home that didn't flinch when they changed. When Luca dyed his hair silver. When Noel asked about therapy. When Jude told Julian he thought he might not be like other boys. And Julian just smiled and said, "You're still my brother." Their house sat at the edge of town, near the woods where the fire once burned. It was crooked, drafty, and cluttered, but it pulsed with warmth. Every night, they sat together at the dinner table, elbows bumping, voices overlapping. Some nights, they argued. Some nights, they cried. But most nights, they laughed. And somehow, in a town that never wanted them, they made a life that never stopped growing. They didn't need the world to understand them. They only needed each other. Teenage years are never easy, but for a family that the world already misunderstood, they came like a storm with no warning. Finn was the first to slip away. He left a note on the kitchen counter, short, barely a sentence. "I think you'd be better off without me." He took nothing but his sketchbook and disappeared into the cold night. Elliot searched every park, every station, every shelter he could find, but there was no sign of him. He left the porch light on every night, hoping it would guide Finn home, and even when it didn't, Elliot sat down each morning and wrote a letter addressed to nowhere. "Dear Finn, man, Taigahan," they began. "I made pancakes today. Julian burned his again. Luca, always light on his feet, was cut from the dance troupe he adored. One parent had raised concerns about him being a distraction. He came home in silence that day, eyeliner smudged with tears he refused to let fall in public." Elliot didn't say a word. Now, that weekend, he cleared space in the backyard and built a tiny wooden stage with leftover planks and paint buckets. When it snowed, they cleared the platform together and danced beneath the gray sky. Noel stopped talking, not all at once, but gradually. First it was meals, then school, than even the stories he used to tell himself in whispers. Elliot noticed how his drawings grew darker, pages filled with figures lost in fog, with no mouths. One Sunday, Elliot packed peanut butter sandwiches and took Noel on a 2-hour drive to a small counseling center. They didn't speak during the drive, but when they returned, Noel quietly placed a new sketch on Elliot's desk. It showed a boy sitting next to a man, both staring at the sky. Neither one was alone. Even Jude and Julian, always inseparable, found themselves pulled apart by something they couldn't name. Julian had started talking about the future, about dating, about exploring who he wanted to be. Jude, more reserved, struggled with the questions that followed. Was it okay to not feel the same pull? Was there something broken in him? They fought one night, not with screams, but with silence. They stopped holding hands. Elliot didn't have all the answers. He couldn't stop the world from pressing in, but he did what he always had. He stayed. He sat beside Luca during rehearsals in the snow. He waited outside Noel's therapy room. He gently told Jude that asexuality wasn't emptiness, and told Julian that identity didn't need to match to be real. Then came the winter that changed everything. A heavy storm rolled through Colorado, covering the mountains in silence and snow. Wind tore at rooftops and windows. In the middle of the night, their house gave way. The old wooden beams collapsed under the weight. No one was hurt, but the home they had built with so much love now lay broken. They had nowhere to go. So Elliot unlocked the art classroom where he still taught. It smelled of dust and forgotten supplies, but it had heat and space. They slept on mats, using paint-stained aprons as blankets. They didn't complain. The next morning, while snow still fell outside, Elliot brought in a notebook filled with sketches, plans for rebuilding the house. Not perfect, not fancy, just enough. One by one, the boys joined him. They found scraps of wood from donation bins, hammered nails with frozen hands, ate meals on the floor. But laughter returned, in small bursts at first, then louder. Even Jude and Julian began to speak again, choosing new words, newer understanding. And then, on Christmas Eve, the door creaked open. Finn stood there, snow in his hair, holding a camera in one hand. His voice cracked as he spoke. I made something. He showed them a video. It was raw, shaky, but powerful. Clips from old phone recordings, laughter in the kitchen, Luca twirling in paint-splattered shoes, Julian and Jude dancing in a hallway. Elliot sleeping in a chair, arms crossed, after a long day. Finn had posted it with the title, My Dad Raised 5 Queer Kids in a Town That Hated Us. The video had gone viral. Over 1 million views. And that night, in the flickering light of a borrowed heater, they watched as strangers from across the world commented, We see you. You are not alone. Your family gives me hope. That night, no one cried alone. They pulled closer, not because the world was ready to accept them, but because they had already accepted each other. What started as a simple video became a movement. Finn's story spread far beyond the borders of their mountain town. News outlets reached out, activists reshared the clip, messages poured in from every corner of the world. Elliot didn't understand hashtags or algorithms, but he understood what he saw, his children, finally seen. Finn received a scholarship from a major LGBTQ+ foundation, not just for his storytelling, but for resilience, for surviving, and then choosing to speak. On his first day of college, he wore the same purple sweater he once got bullied for. Only this time it had a tiny silver pin, a letter E over a paintbrush. Luca, once dismissed for wearing eyeliner and sequins, was now invited to perform at a televised dance showcase in Los Angeles. He brought the silver shoes Elliot had repaired a dozen times. On stage, he spun and soared with arms wide open, and backstage, he cried into Elliot's voicemail because he still needed to hear his father's voice before stepping into a spotlight that no longer terrified him. Noel, the quiet one, poured everything he had into art. He began posting a webtoon called Dad and the Five. It wasn't just a comic, it was a tribute, a thinly veiled story about a man with sad eyes and five misfit stars that refused to dim. The series went viral on TikTok, gathering millions of followers. Fans sent fan art. Others shared how the comic helped them come out. But Noel never showed his face. Until one live stream, when he held up a sign, "My real dad saved my life by letting me draw my own." Jude and Julian changed too, though their path was quieter. Julian, always expressive, came out as bisexual during a panel at school. Jude, more introspective, later shared that he was asexual. Their journey wasn't always smooth. There were arguments, misunderstandings, but never distance. They still held hands on hard days, not because they were the same, but because they chose to walk forward together. The world, once full of judgment, began to soften. One day, Elliot opened his mailbox to find a letter written in shaky handwriting. It was from an old teacher at the school, the same one who once turned a blind eye when Finn was shoved against lockers. "I'm sorry I didn't stand with you." It read, "But I'm standing now." More letters followed. Parents, former students, even strangers. Some apologized for their silence. Others thanked Elliot for existing, for proving that quiet love can be louder than cruelty. Elliot never answered them all. He wasn't seeking applause, but he did begin something new. He bought a small notebook, the kind he used to give to his students, and started writing again. Not lesson plans, not grocery lists, but memories. One page each day, one moment at a time, of the night Julian cried after being misgendered. Of the way Finn clutched his scholarship letter like a lifeline. Of the Sunday morning they rebuilt the roof together, laughing when Noel dropped a hammer through a hole in the ceiling. He didn't call it a memoir, just notes for when I'm gone. And at the top of the first page, he wrote, "I never had a family the way others did. No wedding, no crib in the corner, no family portraits hung on the wall. But one day by day, 5 strangers arrived and stayed. They didn't carry my name, but they carried my heart. Each of them, in their own way, is a miracle I never dared to ask for." The town still had its critics. Some people never changed, but they no longer mattered, because this family, the one built with old wood, secondhand clothes, and unconditional love, had already changed the world. They weren't perfect, but they were together, and that was enough. On the morning of his 60th birthday, Elliot Foster thought he was simply going to brunch. The invitation had been mailed weeks before, a simple cream envelope with gold lettering, signed by all 5 of his sons. "No gifts, just your presence," it said. He didn't ask questions. He never did. He picked out his nicest sweater, the one Noel had once drawn in Dad and the Five, and arrived at the address written on the card. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a lakeside venue, dressed in wildflowers and string lights. Rows of wooden chairs lined the grass. A small stage overlooked the water. Elliot froze when he saw the crowd. Hundreds of people, neighbors, old students, strangers from around the world. Cameras, microphones, rainbow flags. And in the center, Finn, Luca, Noel, Jude, and Julian, each holding hands with someone they loved. Elliot's breath caught. He didn't know whether to cry or step back. But Finn walked up to him, took his hand, and whispered, "We wanted you to witness what you helped create." This wasn't just a birthday, it was a wedding, but not in the traditional sense. Not a single ceremony, not one couple. Each of the 5 sons had chosen this day, this moment, to marry the person they loved. Some with rings, others with booths, some legal, others symbolic, but all real, all sacred. Luca married a Broadway lighting technician he had met backstage. Noel stood beside his editor, a quiet, bookish man who had fallen in love with him through his words. Julian exchanged vows with a boy he had met in a queer youth group, Jude, who never imagined himself in a romantic partnership, stood proudly with a platonic soulmate who honored his identity fully. And Finn looked into the eyes of a man who once wrote a comment under his viral video, "Your story saved me." The ceremony wasn't just for them. It was for Elliot. Noel stepped forward and spoke. "We've been told that family is blood, that love has rules, that who we are doesn't deserve celebration. But we're here because one man, our father, said yes to us when no one else did. He took us in not to fix us, but to see us." Luca continued. "So today we say yes, not just to the ones beside us, but to him, the man who loved quietly, but completely." The ceremony was live-streamed. Within hours, the internet exploded. Headlines called it the most beautiful family wedding ever held. Millions watched. Millions cried. And Elliot, who never expected to be the center of anything, found himself seated on the front row, weeping silently, his hand over his mouth, overwhelmed by a love too large to measure. After the vows, the boys presented him with a final gift. It wasn't wrapped. It was a plaque, carved from the wood of their old house. It read, "The Elliot Foster Fund, a scholarship for queer youth who deserve a home." The fund had already launched. Donations were pouring in. The goal wasn't small: to support young people who, like them, had once been told they were too much, too little, too different to be loved. Elliot touched the plaque as if it were fragile. Then, for the first time in a long time, he stood to speak. His voice trembled, not from age, but from gratitude. "I never expected to be a father," he said. "I thought love had left me behind. But somehow, 5 people walked into my life and gave me more than I ever deserved. You didn't just give me a family. You gave me a purpose. Thank you for coming home." The sky turned golden as the sun dipped behind the lake. Music played. Guests danced. But Elliot stayed seated for a moment, watching his sons, laughing, holding hands, kissing cheeks, wiping tears. They had built something stronger than walls. They had built legacy. And in the center of it stood a man who once thought love had passed him by. But love, it turns out, had just been waiting. What's the bravest kind of love you've ever witnessed? Let us know below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Story, where every voice, every love, and every family matters.